This week, I'm continuing with reading to you from the Trust Premium book that just came out last week. This week, it's chapters 1 and 2. In these chapters, I will talk about the transformation of the sales process from visiting a store in person when you wanted to buy something to the unethical practices used today in sales. I will talk about 3 dimensions: the decline in intimacy from in-person all the way to mass-customized email addresses, the decline in ethical sales techniques all the way to scams and identity theft, all the way to criminal activities, and the use of technology, all the way to deep fakes. I will also show you in numbers how those caused us to be less trusting and more skeptical, and as a result, how it caused the success rate of sales calls to plummet. The conclusion from these 2 chapters is clear. Cold calls don't work anymore. Your only differentiator is trust. Let's go to chapters 1 and 2 right after this. Welcome to The Trust Show. I'm Yoram Solomon, your host, the author of the Book of Trust, and facilitator of the Trust Habits Workshop. My mission is simple. I want to help you form habits that build your trustworthiness, because the answer to this question will have the biggest impact on your personal and professional success or failure. Can I trust you? Part 1. Trust Premium. Chapter 1. The Nigerian Prince. Every once in a while, I receive an email that starts something like this, and this is a direct copy and paste. Subject, all capitals, urgent reply needed, from princeofnigeria@gmail.com to my email address. Everything else is capitalized. Dear friend, Happy New Year. I know that this message will come to you as a surprise. I am the next heir to the throne in Nigeria, the Crown Prince, Apara Kachinpogorn. I hope that you will not expose or betray this trust, and confident that I am about to repose on you for the mutual benefit of our families. Stop quote. Further down, the email suggested transferring significant money into my account, varying from hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars. The grammar is typically not great, to say the least, which makes it more authentic considering that a Nigerian prince, or an associate thereof, supposedly sent it. If you respond, you will be asked to accept a check and deposit it into your account, after which you will be asked to send back some of the money. Sounds reasonable, right? Except that, a few days after you send part of the money from your bank account, the bank will inform you that the original deposit was declined and was fraudulent. However, the money that you sent was perfectly fine. Have you ever received an email like this? Did you respond? Did you know you were being scammed? One of the funniest TED Talks I've ever watched was Jane Veitch, who described responding to such an email. You should watch it. These scam emails come in different shapes and forms. As a professional speaker, I was invited once to deliver a keynote in Singapore. I would be flown there first class with an entourage of up to 6 people. I was going to be paid much more than I'm typically paid. Again, a scam. One of the most unique dear friend emails I ever received was this one, which appeared in my inbox late in 2013. It arrives from the White House, from an email address info@messages.whitehouse.gov. The title, the subject is Invitation, White House Economic Briefing and Meeting. Right underneath is the logo of the White House. And it says, Friend, Please join the White House Business Council and Business Forward for a briefing at the White House to discuss the President's economic priorities. This is an opportunity for you to share your advice and expertise with senior administration officials and meet with fellow business leaders from around the country. Past speakers have included Chairman of the National Economic Council, Gene Sperling, Chairman of the Council Economic Advisors, Jason Furman, and Senior Advisor to the President, Valerie Jarrett. We hope you can join us for a substantive conversation where you will hear the latest updates from the White House and also share your feedback with top policymakers. This meeting is closed press and off the record. Now there's a link that says click here to register. Here are the details. What? White House Business Council and Business Forward briefing and discussion. When? Wednesday, December 18th at 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Where? The White House, Washington, D.C. If you have any questions, please contact Ali Blumenstock, and there is an email address for her at Business Forward, or 202-861-1274. Important, after you register, a staff member from Business Forward will call you to collect the security information that is required to process your clearance to enter the White House. You will not be able to participate in the meeting if you do not submit your security information by the deadline. There's another link that says, "Don't forget to register." Thank you, Sam. Signed, Sam Brown, Director of the White House Business Council, the White House. Amazing, isn't it? I was invited to the White House. Me. All I had to do was click on the link in the email to register, and I was going to get a call the next day to collect the security information required to process your clearance to enter the White House. You guessed it. That would include my Social Security number. By the way, did you notice that while they had my email address, they apparently didn't have my first name and referred to me as friend, just like the Nigerian prince? But they did have the White House logo on top. So, let me ask you, would you have clicked on the link to register? Let's say you did and left your personal information there. The next day, you would receive a call asking for your personal information, including your Social Security number, to process your clearance to enter the White House. Would you give it to them? No? Why not? I'll tell you why not. Because the probability of such an email being genuine, or a phone call asking you to donate to a children's hospital, the Firefighter Association, or the North Texas Food Bank is so low that you simply ignore it. Chapter 2. Spam, Deception, and Scams. Things like that cause us to lose trust as customers when someone is genuinely trying to sell us something we need. But it's a lot more than that. First part, the decline in intimacy from in-person sales to mass email. In the early days of commerce, sales were deeply personal. The interactions between buyers and sellers were steeped in familiarity, trust, and shared accountability. Over time, this intimate relationship eroded as technology and mass outreach strategies reshaped the sales process. Today, we see the culmination of this decline in mass email outreach, which has stripped away almost all vestiges of personal connection. Going to the store, trust rooted in community. In the past, people shopped with purpose. Customers typically went to the store when they needed a specific product or service, and they often knew the business they patronized. Trust played a central role in these interactions. Stores were usually local and operated by individuals or families known within the community. Reputation mattered. A store's standing was often passed through a word of mouth or familiar loyalty. When customers entered the store, they expected knowledgeable, attentive service. Salespeople, often the store owners themselves, focused on building long-term relationships with their clientele. These interactions were personal and face-to-face, allowing buyers to observe sincerity, competence, and a genuine desire to help. Decisions were often made collaboratively, with the salesperson acting as a trusted advisor rather than a distant entity driven solely by profit. This setting fostered accountability. If a product failed or a service fell short, the customer knew exactly where to go and whom to approach for a resolution. Both buyer and seller shared a mutual interest in maintaining trust, translating to higher ethical standards and stronger community ties. However, the most important part was that the customer chose the store when they needed it and for what they needed. The store did not choose them. Knocking on doors. The rise of stranger interactions. As commerce evolved, the door-to-door salesperson emerged, bringing products directly to customers' homes. This marked a shift away from the localized trust of the neighborhood store. While the interactions remained face-to-face, the personal connection began to erode. Salespeople were strangers, often unknown and unvetted. Unlike the store owner, they had no established reputation to rely on. They could trick you into buying something, and the salesperson would be nowhere to be found when he didn't deliver the value you expected. This lack of familiarity made it harder for customers to feel at ease. The sales dynamic became less about mutual benefit and more about persuasion. Salespeople introduced scripted pitches designed to elicit specific responses and overcome objections. Customers often felt pressured into making decisions as the visit was unsolicited, unexpected, and often unwelcomed. Although face-to-face interactions retained some level of intimacy, trust was more challenging to establish. The salesperson prioritized their quotas and commissions, often at the expense of genuine customer needs. Ethical considerations began to decline as salespeople used high-pressure tactics to close deals. More about those later. The intimacy of in-person interactions was still present, but the transactional nature of the exchange increasingly overshadowed it. The cold call, losing the personal touch. The invention of the telephone revolutionized sales, giving rise to cold calling in the mid-20th century. Businesses realized they could reach potential customers without the logistical challenges of in-person visits. While efficient, this method further distanced salespeople from their customers, reducing intimacy and trust. With cold calling, the personal connection of face-to-face interaction disappeared. Customers would no longer rely on body language or eye contact to assess sincerity. Instead, they were left to interpret the tone of voice and the words of a stranger over the phone. This depersonalization made trust harder to build, and the sales process became increasingly impersonal. Cold calling also prioritized quantity over quality. Sales teams were measured by how many calls they could make daily rather than the depth of their relationships with potential clients. As a result, interactions became formulaic and mechanical. Call scripts replaced genuine conversations, and customers were often left feeling like mere numbers in a sales quota. And that's exactly what they were. Over time, trust continued to decline as companies outsourced cold calling to call centers offshore. This introduced additional barriers, such as language differences, hard-to-understand accents, and cultural mismatches, further alienating customers. Instead of feeling valued, potential buyers began to see cold calls as intrusive and bothersome. Email and spam, the lowest point of intimacy. The advent of email brought sales interactions to an all-time low in terms of intimacy. What began as a tool for quick and convenient communication quickly devolved into a means of mass outreach. Salespeople could now send messages to thousands of potential customers with a single click, erasing any semblance of personal connection. As part of a mailing list, your contact information was traded by companies for a price inconsiderate of the invasion of your privacy. Unlike phone calls, emails lacked even the minimal intimacy of a voice. Communication was reduced to written words without emotional cues such as tone or inflection. This made it nearly impossible for recipients to gauge sincerity or intent. Messages felt cold and impersonal, often beginning with generic greetings like "Dear customer," "Dear friend," or just "friend," like my White House email. Your name was often misspelled or completely butchered, furthering the depersonalization of communication. Spam became the norm. Companies purchased unvalidated mailing lists, sending unsolicited messages to people who had never expressed interest in their products or services. This shift from targeted engagements to indiscriminate outreach further eroded trust. Customers began to associate sales emails with annoyance, skepticism, and deception. Interestingly, the term spam originated from a 1970 Monty Python sketch where the word spam refers to a canned meat product, was humorously repeated ad nauseum. By the early 1990s, spam had become slang for the flood of unwanted messages clogging people's inboxes. To combat this flood of spam, email providers developed sophisticated filters to block unwanted messages. Regulations such as Do Not Call List, the Can Spam Act, and GDPR sought to curb unsolicited communication, but the damage was already done. Sales emails, even legitimate ones, became a source of distrust. Customers grew wary of clicking links or opening attachments, fearing scams or malware. Mass email campaigns introduced the concept of mass customization, where fields like first name were used to create the illusion of personalization. However, these efforts often backfired. Recipients could easily identify the mass-produced nature of these messages, further diminishing their trust in the sender, who pretends to be personal. The decline in ethical behavior, from value to deception. Sales practices have also undergone a troubling ethical transformation. What began as straightforward exchanges of genuine and transparent value has devolved into a progression of manipulative tactics, misrepresentation, and outright criminal behavior. Each stage in this decline reflects an erosion of trust between businesses and their customers. From value to influence techniques. Historically, sales revolved around providing authentic value, offering products or services tailored to meet customers' needs. However, as competition intensified and the pressure to close deals grew, the focus began to shift. Sales started emphasizing perception over substance, leveraging psychological influence techniques to drive decisions. Behavioral economics, championed by research such as Danielle Kahneman, Dan Ariely, and Robert Cialdini, brought attention to human decision-making patterns. Techniques such as reciprocity, concession, and scarcity, among others, became prominent tools in sales arsenals. Reciprocity exploits the human inclination to return favors. For example, offering a small gift or free sample creates an unspoken obligation to reciprocate by purchasing. Concession uses the door-in-the-face tactic, where an initial, larger ask, such as a higher price, is followed by a smaller, a more reasonable one. This sequence gives the impression of a deal, even when the smaller ask was the intended goal all along. Scarcity amplifies urgency by highlighting limited availability, pushing customers to act quickly to avoid missing out, even when the scarcity is artificial. While these techniques are not inherently unethical, their misuse often leads to manipulative practices. Instead of enhancing the actual value of a product or service, these strategies focus on influencing customer behavior, sometimes resulting in regret or dissatisfaction after the purchase. Pressure tactics and small print. As sales techniques evolved, pressure tactics became common, forcing customers into decisions they were unprepared to make. These methods created a sense of urgency that often clouded judgment. Limited time offers. Customers are pressured with claims that a deal will expire soon, even if the offer is continuously available. Bundling. Complex pricing structures obscured the true value of individual components, making it hard for customers to assess the deal. Confusion through ambiguity. Deliberately vague explanations of terms confuse customers into agreements that might otherwise reject. Accompanying these tactics is the near ubiquitous use of small print, a practice designed to shield companies legally while withholding critical information from customers. For instance, a car dealership might advertise an attractively low monthly payment, but the fine print reveals a substantial down payment or hidden fees. Television and radio commercials frequently cram disclaimers into unreadable fonts or rapid speech, fulfilling legal disclosure requirements without genuinely informing the customer. These strategies exploit legal loopholes rather than fostering transparent communication, further eroding trust. Misrepresentation, a steady slide. Beyond influence and pressure, sales practices increasingly relied on misrepresentation to close deals. This involves exaggerating the benefits of products or inflating qualifications to mislead customers into believing they're making an informed decision. Examples of misrepresentation include false credentials. Professionals may exaggerate or falsify qualifications, such as honorary degrees presented as earned doctorates. Questionable accolades. Individuals or companies claim top status from obscure or unrecognized organizations using dubious awards or ranking to create an illusion of authority or excellence. Image manipulation. Sellers show images of products that look very different than they would once the customer purchased them, such as a hamburger sandwich that looks much bigger and sizzlier than in reality. Algorithm manipulation. Authors sometimes game ranking algorithms to claim things such as bestseller status, boosting perceived credibility. Bait and switch. Companies lure customers with low-priced offers but redirect them to higher-priced alternatives once they engage. Misrepresentation extends to packaging and advertising as well. For example, fine print disclosures often reveal restrictive conditions that directly contradict the promises made in large, bold claims. By the time customers discover the limitations, they're usually locked into agreements. For example, when I complained once about the low bandwidth I was getting from a broadband internet service provider after purchasing a high bandwidth service package, I was referred to the small print indicating that the promised bandwidth was under ideal conditions and on best effort basis. Another common tactic is presenting official-looking communications that mimic government or authoritative bodies. Letters styled to appear handwritten, or emails bearing government-like logos, such as my White House email, exploit familiar visual cues to mislead customers into thinking the message is legitimate. Deception, intentional misleading. Deception represents a deeper ethical decline, where sales tactics cross the line from misrepresentation into deliberate falsehoods. Unlike influence techniques or ambiguous small print, deception involves knowingly making promises or claims that cannot be fulfilled. One form of this is unintentional deception, where individuals knowingly mislead customers with the belief that they will eventually deliver on their promises. For instance, a startup might exaggerate its capabilities, hoping future success will justify current false claims. This practice is sometimes known as fake it until you make it. More egregious forms of deception include outright lies about product quality, warranty terms, or features that do not exist. Deceptive sales tactics exploit the inherent trust customers place in businesses, often resulting in financial loss or significant disappointment. Criminal behavior, the dark end of the spectrum. At the furthest extreme of ethical decline lies criminal behavior. Unlike the manipulative but legal tactics described earlier, criminal sales practices aim solely to exploit and harm customers without delivering any value whatsoever or even the intention of providing value. Examples include phishing and fraudulent emails. Scammers send deceptive emails to steal personal information, posing as legitimate businesses. Fake services and products. Fraudsters create bogus companies to extract payments for goods or services that are never delivered. Identity theft. Trust is exploited to gain access to sensitive information such as social security numbers or financial accounts. These actions are not merely unethical. They are illegal and designed to harm. The growing prevalence of scams reflects a stark collapse of trust in commercial relationships. Criminal sales practices exploit trust to its breaking point, leaving victims emotionally and financially devastated. From bait-and-switch schemes to identity theft, these tactics signal the ultimate breakdown of ethical standards in sales. The evolution from delivering value to manipulating perception marks a steady erosion of ethics in sales. Each stage, whether through influence, pressure, misrepresentation, or outright deception, chips away at the trust that once defined the buyer-seller relationship. While the line between ethical and unethical practices is often blurred, the transition to criminality represents a definite breach of trust and legal norms. At the very edge of the ethical spectrum lies the domain of cybercrime and cyberterrorism, which exploits trust and digital vulnerabilities to cause widespread harm. These acts include hacking into financial systems, deploying ransomware, or using phishing campaigns to manipulate individuals into divulging sensitive information. Cyberterrorism is sometimes state-sponsored, targeting infrastructures or businesses to destabilize economies or undermine public trust in institutions. Unlike traditional scams, these attacks are often executed on a massive scale, with goals extending beyond personal profit to incite fear, chaos, or geopolitical advantage. This ultimate breach of trust transforms digital interactions into battlegrounds, highlighting the devastating consequences when trust is exploited in the virtual realm. The role of technology in the erosion of trust. Technology has revolutionized the sales process, opening doors to greater efficiency and broader reach. However, it has also contributed to the decline of intimacy and trust. starting with the invention of the telephone and email, and accelerating through mass email campaigns, automated systems, and AI-driven deception. The emphasis on scale and automation has come at the expense of personal connection. The telephone: efficiency over connection. The invention of the telephone in the late 19th century was a pivotal moment in communication and commerce. For the first time, businesses could reach customers without requiring them to visit a store. Conversations that previously relied on in-person interactions could now take place remotely. While the telephone increased convenience, it began to erode the intimacy that defined earlier sales relationships. Without face-to-face interaction, customers lost access to critical emotional cues like body language and facial expressions, making it harder to assess sincerity. Trust became dependent on the tone of voice and the words used, which often felt impersonal and transactional. Not only could the customer not discern the sincerity of the salesperson, but the salesperson, calling many customers every day, was less invested in every call, and the customer could sense that. The shift was exacerbated by the rise of cold calling, where businesses used the telephone to reach out to potential customers who had no prior relationship with them. Cold calling prioritized volume over connection, as sales teams were tasked with making as many calls as possible. Scripts replaced organic and sincere conversation, creating a mechanical and often frustrating customer experience. Over time, the efficiency of the telephone led to its overuse in sales. Customers became increasingly wary of unsolicited calls, associating them with intrusive sales tactics rather than meaningful interactions. Email: a new era of communication. The invention of email in the 1970s introduced another transformative leap in communication. Unlike telephones, emails offer the ability to send messages without needing immediate response or direct engagement. Businesses quickly adopted email for its efficiency, using it to communicate with customers at scale. In its early days, email maintained a certain, albeit low, level of intimacy. Messages were often crafted thoughtfully and targeted at specific individuals or groups. However, as the technology became more widespread, its use in sales began to mirror the trajectory of the telephone. Emails grew less personal, often relying on templates and generic language. The shift from individualized communication to mass email campaigns marked a significant decline in trust. Customers began to view email outreach as impersonal and overwhelming, especially as spam emails flooded inboxes. Mass emails: scaling at the expense of trust. Email efficiency eventually gave rise to mass email campaigns, where businesses sent identical messages to thousands or millions of recipients simultaneously. While this approach dramatically increased reach, it also stripped away any sense of personal connection. Early mass emails often began with generic greetings like "Dear Friend" or "Dear Customer," revealing their impersonal nature. Recognizing the need to appear more tailored, companies turned to mass customization techniques, using automation to insert personal details such as the recipient's name or recent activity. For example, emails might start with "Dear First Name" or reference a recent purchase to create an illusion of intimacy, where the email software would replace "first name" with the content of the first name field, creating the perception of personalization. However, these efforts fell short of fostering genuine trust. Customers quickly recognized these messages as automated, undermining their credibility. The content often lacked depth, leaving recipients feeling like they were just another name on a list rather than a valued individual. Furthermore, Knowing that the salesperson was using technology to trick the customer into thinking the message was personal led to further reduced trust. The widespread use of mass email also led to a dramatic increase in spam. By 2022, more than 56.5% of all global email traffic was classified as spam, with much of it tied to scams or irrelevant promotions. This deluge of unsolicited communication further eroded trust as customers struggled to differentiate between legitimate outreach and deceptive schemes. Mass phone calls, automation without emotion. Similar to mass emails, the evolution of telephonic sales into mass phone calls prioritized volume over relationships. Automated dialing systems allowed sales teams to call multiple numbers simultaneously, further distancing the interaction from the customer. These systems introduced common frustrations such as long silences before a representative connected or impersonal recorded messages. Such experiences disrupted the natural flow of conversation and made customers further feel like they were being treated as data points rather than people. Your phone rings. You pick up, say hello, and there is silence. As the seconds pass, your frustration increases and your trust in the caller plummets. To reduce costs, many companies outsource phone operations to remote call centers. While cost-effective, this practice often led to language barriers, cultural mismatches, and a lack of context for customer concerns. The personal touch that had once been a hallmark of sales was now absent, replaced by standardized scripts and distant operations. The deceptive potential of mass personalization. As technology advanced, businesses sought to regain some semblance of personalization through data-driven approaches. Mass personalization emerged as a way to make interactions feel tailored while still operating at scale. For example, algorithms allowed businesses to send targeted emails based on browsing history, purchase patterns, or demographic information. While these tactics initially seemed promising, they often failed to deliver genuine intimacy. Customers could discern the difference between a truly personalized interaction and an automated one, leading to skepticism. Some instances of mass personalization bordered on deception. Businesses would use customer data to craft communications that appeared highly specific but were generated entirely by algorithms. While the intent was to create trust, these tactics often backfired when customers realized the interactions lacked authenticity. Sometimes, the recipients even considered the breadth of information known about them creepy. Deepfakes and AI-driven deception. Many tools and programs allow you to create a seemingly thoughtful interaction by clicking a single button. For example, when Facebook knows it's a friend's birthday, it gives you a whole customized message you can send them by clicking one button. You don't have to remember their birthday. You don't have to write the message. You don't have to add the graphics. You only have to click one button. Initially, those appear to suggest that you put some thought into them. But over time, recipients became desensitized to those as they are offered the same options for your birthday. This is perhaps the most rudimentary form of artificial intelligence, and it is used in both social and commercial contexts. However, the most recent and alarming development in sales technology is the rise of deepfakes and AI-driven interactions. These tools use artificial intelligence to create hyper-realistic audio, video, or text that mimics human behavior. For example, voice cloning. AI can replicate a trusted voice, such as that of a CEO or celebrity, to deliver personalized messages. Video deepfakes. AI-generated videos can make it appear as though someone is endorsing a product or service even if they never did. Chatbots and AI avatars, automated systems simulate human-like conversations to interact with customers. While these technologies can be used ethically, for instance, in customer support or training scenarios, they are frequently employed to manipulate trust due to the understanding that high intimacy, such as that of voice and video, would increase trust. A customer receiving a video message from what appears to be a familiar authority figure might feel compelled to act, only to later discover that the interaction was fabricated. These advancements have heightened customer skepticism. As people become more aware of the potential for deception, they are increasingly cautious in their interactions with businesses. Technology's double-edged sword. The progression from the telephone to email and ultimately to AI-driven tools like deepfakes highlights the double-edged nature of technology in sales. On one hand, these innovations offer unprecedented efficiency and scale. On the other, they have often undermined the trust that forms the foundation of successful sales relationship. As automation and artificial intelligence continue to evolve, businesses must navigate the fine line between leveraging technology's capabilities and preserving the authenticity and connection that customers increasingly demand. The evolution of sales methods has seen a sharp decline in both intimacy and ethical standards, fueled by the misuse of advancing technologies. From the face-to-face transparency of in-store purchases to the impersonal bulk emails and spam, the trust between sellers and buyers has eroded. Similarly, ethical behavior has shifted from value-based interactions to manipulative tactics and outright criminal activities such as identity theft and phishing scams. The rise of sophisticated technologies, including deepfake tools, has further undermined trust, leaving customers increasingly skeptical of sales calls and outreach efforts. Consequences of the decline in intimacy, ethics, and the misuse of technology in sales. The erosion of intimacy, ethical standards, and the unethical use, shall we say abuse, of technology in sales has profoundly impacted how businesses interact with their customers. Each of these elements has contributed to a collapse in trust, creating a landscape where legitimate sales efforts are increasingly viewed with suspicion. Let's examine the data that underscores the gravity of this shift. Trust erosion through spam and unsolicited communication. The rise of mass email and phone outreach enabled by advancing technology has inundated customers with unwanted communications. By 2022, 56.5% of all global emails were classified as spam. Of these, 73% were tied directly to identity theft schemes, while 36% were related to marketing or advertising efforts. The United States alone generated an astounding 8.61 billion spam emails daily, leading to significant customer frustration. Between 2020 and 2021, spam calls increased by 118%, more than doubling in just 1 year. This sheer volume has conditioned consumers to view unsolicited emails or phone calls as likely fraudulent, further eroding trust in legitimate outreach. The financial toll of scams and fraud. The misuse of technology in sales has also fueled an explosion in scams, identity theft, and fraudulent activities. Spam emails have cost businesses an estimated $20.5 billion annually. Phone scams have surged, with losses in the United States rising from $29.8 billion in 2021 to $39.5 billion in 2022, representing a 23% increase in just 1 year. In 2022, 68.4 million Americans reported financial losses to phone scams, with the average scam costing recipients $567.41, a sharp rise from $182 in 2021. These figures illustrate not only the growing sophistication of scams, but also their increasing financial impact. Identity theft is another critical area of concern. A 2023 Gallup survey revealed that 11% of Americans have experienced identity theft firsthand, and 16% reported it affecting someone in their household. These rates surpass those of theft, vandalism, or burglary, highlighting the pervasive nature of digital fraud. Additionally, 8% of respondents admitted to being tricked into sending money or providing financial access, with 15% noting similar occurrences within their households. Gallup's data also showed the psychological toll of these crimes. 72% of Americans fear falling victims to scams, far exceeding concerns about car theft, only 51%, mugging, 37%, or violent crimes such as murder, 28%, and sexual assault, 27%. This heightened anxiety demonstrates how the misuse of technology has fundamentally reshaped public perception of safety and trust in sales interactions. Finally, according to security.org, deepfake fraud incidents increased tenfold between 2022 and 2023. The decline in sales effectiveness. The erosion of trust, combined with unethical practices and intrusive technology, and the harmful financial consequences of those, have drastically reduced the effectiveness of traditional sales techniques. Consider the following trends in cold calling. Gartner reports that only 2 to 3% of cold calls now result in meaningful conversations that lead to further engagement. TOPO, a B2B sales research firm, finds that conversion rates from lead to opportunity in the B2B sector are only 2 to 5%. Ringlead places the average cold calling success rate at a mere 1.5%. Haya's research shows that 94% of cold calls go unanswered, often blocked by spam filters, caller ID recognition, or call blocking apps. These numbers reflect more than just a declining interest. They represent a significant shift in customer behavior driven by mistrust. Based on multiple sources, in the 1990s and early 2000s, cold calling success rates were 5 to 10%, depending on the industry, with some reports reaching as high as 8 to 10%. Now, it's between 1 to 3% and declining. Trust, the ultimate sales differentiator. As the effectiveness of traditional sales techniques continues to decline, trust is emerging as the single most critical factor in successful sales. Customers are no longer swayed by frequent outreach, aggressive tactics, or clever technology. They increasingly make purchasing decisions based on the authenticity and reliability of the business they engage with. Simply put, trust is no longer a competitive advantage. It is the essential foundation for success in the modern marketplace. The end of traditional techniques. The data is clear. Traditional outreach methods such as cold calls and mass emails are failing. Response rates have plummeted, with success rates for cold calls now dropping 70 to 90% compared to previous decades. Similarly, spam emails have inundated inboxes, making legitimate outreach nearly indistinguishable from scams. As these tactics falter, sales teams often double down on volume, making more calls, sending more emails, and automating more processes to try to compensate. However, this approach only exacerbates the problem. Customers, already overwhelmed by impersonal and intrusive communications, grow more distrustful and disengaged. The shift to trust-based sales. In stark contrast to these failing strategies, trust-based sales are proving more effective than ever. Customers may still want the products and services businesses offer, but they are far more likely to buy from providers they trust. The trust factors allows businesses to break through the noise, establishing meaningful relationships that lead to long-term loyalty and repeat businesses. Let's look at this mathematically for a second. The success rate of sales calls is the product of three factors, notwithstanding whether the customer wants or needs the product or service: the number of calls, the effort put into every call, and the effectiveness of the specific type of call. Let's consider what is happening on each side of the equation. The number of cold calls may continue to increase as the effort and amount of time placed into each call decreases. However, at some point, you will call all your potential customers. At that point, this number will plateau. The effort put into every call will be reduced until it is minimal and cannot be reduced further after that. The effectiveness of cold calls will continue to decline as customers don't trust them. Since trust-based calls require more effort, you can place a much smaller number of those, which means you can continue to grow this number without hitting the ceiling. As you become more proficient in building trust-based relationships, the effort required per call will decrease. Due to the decline of trust in cold calls, that trust will shift towards trust-based calls. This trend signals a significant shift. We may already be at the crossover point where selling through trust is not only more sustainable, but also more efficient and effective than traditional methods. As customers become increasingly wary of outdated tactics, businesses that prioritize trust can achieve better results with less effort, while those clinging to conventional techniques will find themselves investing more resources for diminishing returns. The future of sales. Trust is the gold standard. In an era where customers are increasingly skeptical of sales efforts, and for many good reasons, trust is no longer just a differentiator. It's the only path forward. Businesses that invest in building trust today will not only meet the expectations of modern customers, but also position themselves for sustainable success in the future. By prioritizing trust, companies can transcend the noise of mass outreach, reclaim the human connection that has always been the heart of effective sales. Trust-based approaches are not merely a response to the failures of traditional tactics. They represent the future of sales, where authenticity, reliability, and integrity are the ultimate keys to success. This principle applies equally to professionals offering their own services, whether they are accountants, lawyers, financial advisors, photographers, contractors, real estate brokers, consultants, advisors, coaches, or other independent practitioners. Like corporate salespeople, these professionals must avoid impersonal tactics such as purchasing mailing lists or relying on mass email programs, which often erode trust rather than build it. Instead, they should focus on cultivating genuine relationships, one client at a time. By demonstrating reliability, understanding individual client needs, and delivering consistent value, professionals can establish themselves as trusted advisors, ensuring long-term success and meaningful client connections. In the movie Other People's Money, Danny DeVito, playing the takeover investor Lawrence Garfield, makes a speech. In his speech, he says, at one time, there must have been dozens of companies making buggy whips. And I'll bet the last company around was the one that made the best goddamn buggy whip you ever saw. Now, how would you have liked to have been a stockholder in that company? Cold calls are dying. Yes, plenty of companies, salespeople, and other professionals are still making them. But have no doubt, they are dying. Now, how would you like to be the last salesperson, the last professional still making them, hoping to find customers that way? Let me summarize this chapter with the following question. Would you rather spend your time calling someone who has no budget, no interest, and no current need, or reach out to someone who has the budget, needs what you offer, needs it now, already knows you, trusts you, and is eager to call you first? I still owe you something. By now, you should recognize that trust is your ultimate differentiator and feel ready to leave behind outdated sales techniques that undermine trustworthiness. Naturally, you might ask yourself, how can I become more trusted by my customers? Rest assured, this book will provide a comprehensive answer to that question. But first, it was essential for you to arrive at this understanding on your own. But before I move on, I owe you the end of my White House email story. Yes, the story didn't end with that one email. I consider myself technically savvy and pretty good at detecting email scams and spam. The first thing I did was to hover all over the links. To my surprise, they all seemed legitimate. The email address that this email was sent from came from the whitehouse.gov server. This was a high-quality hack. It wasn't just an email. Someone went the extra mile to make this look legitimate. I also checked out the company that was supposed to call me the next day, Business Forward, and found that it is a lobbying company located in Washington, D.C., and that the White House really does business with them. I also found that Ali Blumenstock, who was named in that email, did exist in that company, and that Sam Brown was, in fact, working at the White House as the director of the White House Business Council. Someone really put a lot of thought into getting my social security number. Or could it be real? At that point, I started having my doubts. How would I find out? I decided to call the office of my U.S. representative, Sam Johnson, who 7 years later graciously wrote the foreword to one of my main books, The Book of Trust. The office administrator asked me to forward the email to her, which I did. An hour later, she called me back and said she couldn't find anything about such a meeting. "Why don't you call the White House?" she asked. Yeah, right, I thought to myself, but wait a minute. Why not? I don't have to be afraid of calling the White House. So I did. I didn't trust the number at the bottom of the email. I didn't trust anything about the email. I Googled the number for the White House. It was the same number that appeared at the bottom of that email, 202-456-1111. When the White House receptionist, or whoever answers the phone, answered, she knew nothing about such a meeting. She asked who had sent the email, and I told her Sam Brown had supposedly sent it. She forwarded me to Sam Brown's extension. He didn't answer. I almost hung up. This was too far already. But at the last moment, I decided to leave him a voicemail. "Hi, Sam. This is Yoram Solomon from Plano, Texas. I just wanted to let you know that I received an email supposedly from you that invited me to a meeting at the White House. I just wanted you to know that such emails are coming out in your name. You don't have to call me back. Just in case, I left my phone number. It would have been rude not to." The next day was a Leadership Plano Day. I was part of that program in the city of Plano. The program is highly selective and meets monthly to learn about issues related to Plano. When you sign up for this program, you must provide a commitment from the company you work for that you will not have any work responsibilities on program days, once a month, and a personal commitment to keep your phone off on those days. You are supposed to be 100% focused on the program without any distractions. You are supposed to turn your phone off and not only silence it. Given that I had a wife and 2 young daughters then, I wasn't going to turn off my phone completely. I would keep it silenced on vibrate mode. The program's executive director was Andre Davidson, who was also served as a Plano City Council member at that time. And she was strict, very strict. She would tell you exactly where to sit. She was in control. And then, a few hours into the program, my phone vibrated. I looked up and could tell that she heard it. I was embarrassed. I looked at the number and didn't recognize it. There was no caller ID. I didn't even recognize the area code, but there was something familiar about this number. It ended with 1111. And then it hit me. This was the White House calling me back. I immediately picked up the phone and stepped outside of the conference room. I looked at Andre. She had a disapproving look. It was more than disapproving. It was angry. I could tell she was trying to shoot lasers at me with her look, but she hadn't mastered that skill. I stepped outside and answered the phone. On the other side was Sam Brown from the White House. He said, "You left me a voicemail yesterday. Now, only 2 people in the world would know that I left him a voicemail. I was one of them, and he was the other." So I repeated the story about the email supposedly sent from him. To my surprise, and this is the understatement of the decade, he confirmed that, in fact, he did send this email. So I'm actually invited to the White House? I asked. "Yes," he answered. "Are you available to be here on that date?" "Which White House?" I asked, feeling stupid as soon as the words left my mouth. "The one on 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue," he replied. "How many people are invited?" I asked. 60, he replied. "Do you want to tell me that somewhere there is a list of the top 60 people out of 300,000 people, Plano residents, and I'm on it? I couldn't believe that." "It's 60 people from all over the U.S., he answered. This was getting weirder by the minute. "How did you get my name?" I insisted. "We work with a company called Business Forward," I already knew that, "and asked them to provide us with a list of top civil and business leaders from all over the U.S. to invite to this meeting. They gave me your name. I don't know anything further. Can you come to the meeting?" I acknowledged. He then asked me to call Business Forward and give them my details. I explained that I would never give my social security number to someone who calls me, and said he looked forward to seeing me at the White House. I stepped back to the conference room. As soon as I walked through the door, my phone in my hand, Andre gave me the same fierce look. Again, she tried to burn me with lasers out of her eyes, but again, it still didn't work. And then I did it. You know, I had to. I said, "I'm sorry, I had to take this call. It was the White House." A month later, I was sitting at the White House for a whole-day meeting, listening to top administrators from the Secretary of Labor to Gene Sperling and Valerie Jarrett and many more. It was a fantastic experience, and we were told that the president was sitting 2 doors down the hall working on his State of the Union address. Why did I tell you this story? Because I almost didn't go. Given the statistics I shared with you about spam and scam emails and phone calls, my trustfulness, more about trustfulness in part 2 of this book, was so low that I didn't believe this was real. We became skeptical, and for a good reason. When you get a cold call, whether in the form of an email or a phone call, most likely it's someone trying to steal your identity, steal money from you, or sell you something you don't need or want. Cold calls don't work anymore. Cold calls are a game of numbers, technology, and unfortunately, unethical sales techniques, and criminal and terrorist activity. You think the more calls you make, the higher the likelihood you will make a sale. But our skepticism has become so high and our trustfulness has become so low that that likelihood is close to zero, if not already zero. Cold calls don't work anymore. The only differentiator that would get you to close deals is trust. This is it for this week, chapters 1 and 2. Hopefully by now you reached a conclusion that cold calls don't work anymore. I know that this episode was a little longer than usual, but it was important to lump 1 and 2, these first two chapters, together because they deliver one message before we're going to the next one. I didn't want to leave you in the middle of it, especially since chapter 1 is pretty short. Next week, I will read to you chapter 3, the purchase decision and beyond, where I'll talk about the dynamics of what happens leading all the way to the purchase decision the customer makes and what happens after that. And a big part of it is going to be the perceived versus actual value and price, and the role that transferable trust, inside and out, plays in the whole sales process. That's it for today. I hope this made you think a little differently about trust and trust premium. May trust be with you. This was The Trust Show. What would you like to know about trust and trustworthiness? Let me know and I'll answer it in a future episode. I would love to hear from you. Email me at yoram@thetrustshow.com. If you like this episode, subscribe to the show so you will automatically get notified when I release a new episode. Rate it. Write a review for this podcast because those ratings help not only you, but also others looking for podcasts just like this. If you're looking for more resources to learn about how to build trust, be trusted, or know who to trust, look up my workshops, online courses, books, or go to my website, trusthabits.com. And remember that the answer to these two questions will have the biggest impact on your personal and professional success or failure. Can I trust you? And can you trust me? Thank you for listening or watching The Trust Show.